Hello, Frederic. Thank you so much for being here with Chung Hung Institute for our podcast today. Can we begin with a little introduction? Who are you, Frederic, and what do you do?
You want me to introduce me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hi. Thank you for connecting with me. My name is Fred Luskin, and I'm a longtime forgiveness researcher and teacher, and maybe not as intense as you, but I've had a full adult life meditation practice, and some of what I tried to do with the Forgiveness Project was create a secular method of, keeping your peace without resorting to any religious or spiritual dimensions, but they're there. So at this point, I identify myself as the director of the Stanford Forgiveness Project, and I've written 3 books on forgiveness.
Yeah, and recently I saw you had a workbook out, which I think would help. It seems it will help many people. I can't wait to go through that myself. Can you talk a little bit about your current research, Fred, that you're working on and what you hope to achieve with that research?
The most current research I'm doing is on trying to help people in recovery from addiction to have more self-forgiveness. Um, we just published a book on that called the Forgive for Good Workbook for Recovery, but that took my work and turned it into a workbook, but we're still trying to perfect the piece of self-forgiveness around, maybe the harm one did because of an addiction. The central premise is you want to make peace with your life. Like, that's the central premise. Lives have a lot of suffering. They have a lot of nasty, not so good stuff, and they have a lot of incredible beauty. And the damage of unforgiveness is we use the suffering to obscure the beauty. And you know, it's a heavy load. And so the process is you go from feeling like a victim to somebody who may have been victimized, but you don't identify with it anymore. You leave that identity behind so you can just go back out there and greet your life. Um, that's about as simple as I can get, but that's an essence of forgiveness.
How did you get here, Fred? Like how did you choose forgiveness? What are you willing to share with us? What happened?
There are a couple of threads. One, I did start a meditation practice when I was in college, and it was influenced by both Buddhist stuff and by more yogic stuff. This is a long time ago, so I remember reading The 3 Pillars of Zen and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and
Mhm.
read Alan Watts, but also read Autobiography of a Yogi and Ram Dass's stuff and more yogic based stuff. But I've always had this, it's all the same, or not all the same, but pretty damn close. So having had a meditation spiritual orientation, I looked for avenues to express that in my life. And one of the dimensions was when I was going for a PhD and I had to choose a dissertation topic, I wanted it to have something to do with spiritual practice, but I wanted to present an entirely secular method of spiritual practice. So that's one. The second thing that got me interested in forgiveness was how bad I was at it. So being a forgiveness loser um, propelled me once I recognized that I really couldn't do this, that I had to get some methods to do it. And one of the more sobering truths was at that point for me, meditation was not enough. Like simply having a meditation practice was not enough to forgive. And over the years, I've seen that to be true for a lot of people, given workshops at Spirit Rock on it. And, it's just, it's harder than that, and it's more complex than that. But I learned the hard way by failing at it dramatically. And the third spur was my advisor at Stanford going for my PhD when I was saying, I want to do some kind of heartfelt spiritual thing that I can secularize. He told me, but like, you have to do something with his existing research. And there were very few domains with existing research. Forgiveness was one of them. So at that point, I could not have chosen compassion or love or gratitude because as a doctoral student, you can't invent a field. So those were the three thematics that got me to do a randomized clinical trial of forgiveness now almost 30 years ago. I'm very grateful I did that, but when I did that, it was uncharted territory.
How did you balance that, Fred, with having like the contemplative pedagogy kind of mindset and approach and the Eurocentric psychological approach? How did you find that middle ground here?
I don't know, I met John Kabat-Zinn decades ago, and one of his chief trainers at that point for MBSR was a student of mine at Stanford. And he came in and he introduced himself and was talking to us. And this is like 1995. I mean, this is a long time ago. And he said that his whole approach was he had had years and years of training in meditation and had done Buddhist retreats and Hindu retreats. But the audience that he was working with was not interested in retreats. And so he tried to create a big tent where everyone could fit. It's like you don't have to be a Buddhist to meditate. You don't have to believe in anything to
Yeah.
get the benefit of practice. So I got that meeting with him just a year or two before I started this work, and his like leadership made sense to me. So I'm going to teach forgiveness, but I don't have to come across as some like Christian missionary or some like hard, well, you have to sit for 4 hours. I wanted to help people.
Yeah.
So there was not much discordance. I will say, though, that it's very hard to do anything without some mindful practice. Like you have to have some capacity to see your own processes. Without that, any change is really hard. So that baseline orientation, you can't do much with. Everything else you can titrate to the needs of the population. And it's not that important what my practices are, It's like what's important is trying to be of help to people. So that's the best answer I can offer you on that.
Beautiful. Tell me, Fred, how has your work impacted communities so far? What have you seen directly, the impact of your work?
Forgiveness is a hard sell.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's had that much community impact. Um, Forgiveness requires a maturity. You know, you have to recognize that you have some choice. You have to have some tiny bit, at least, of ego transcendence. Because if you don't, all that matters is what happened to you. We've tried to influence communities, and it's hard because if you come from a community that has antagonisms against another community, and you teach people forgive as we have with people in Northern Ireland and Sierra Leone, we discover that when they go back to their original community, the pressure to maintain their grudge is intense. And so, in order to change a community, you'd have to influence way more people in a community than we ever attempted to. That said, myself and a handful of other academics gave the media and the world permission to think about forgiveness in a different way, like having research and data made it much more available to the community than it had been when it was just a religious quality. And in that way, we have made a slight influence on the community because you can now talk about forgiveness, about its research, about the fact that you can teach it, and the fact that it has physical health benefits. Um, but broader than that, I'd be very cautious.
Tell me, what are the physical health benefits that you found?
I mean, there be what you imagine. If you stop being pissed off or you stop thinking you're a victim, you're going to feel better. You're going to have less stress. Your nervous system is going to be less jolted. Your pain experience will be less because you're not walking around aggrieved, which is a huge difference. That's the negative side. On the positive side, you get benefits simply from coping with your life. Like there's a positiveness from coping to your life by saying, I had something really painful and I got over it. So there's a building of a positivity that also has health benefits. There's something negative health-wise about blaming other people for our suffering. And there's something health-wise about the hostility that comes when you've been harmed and haven't worked that through. Forgiveness minimizes the harm done by both of those.
It's very funny that today's society, everyone wants to point the finger and say, it's your fault. It's never my fault. But I think that there's a lot of the turmoil we experience in the Western society, at least, is we have so much self-hatred, lack of forgiveness. And I wonder if that is why it's so difficult to bring into the communities. How do we overcome this self anguish, really?
I mean, you're obviously a long-term Buddhist practitioner. You don't have to be a long-term meditator to notice how much attack is in your thoughts when you sit. You don't have to do this for 30 years, and you don't have to go on long retreats. All you have to do is sit there and be honest with yourself. You and I know that's one of the major reasons people give up meditation, because they don't like meeting themselves at all. So I'm going to broaden that and say it's more human than Western. We have a tendency to attack as a method of not having to look at ourselves. We have a capacity to do self-attack also when we don't like what we see. It takes a lot of strength to watch those attacks and not get caught up in them. And you know that as well as I do. So I think this is more universal than Western in my thinking. When you practice that attack and self-attack, that becomes a habit. And the difficulty of forgiveness is unwinding that habit of saying, yeah, this is a habit, but you don't need that habit. And you want to practice other things to create different habits. And that's straight from Buddhist thinking. It's like you want to create habits that will do you more good than this habit. That's a general orientation to forgiveness, is to notice it as an arising of your mind, that it becomes a habit. By paying attention, you can choose to change that habit, but you have to create new habits. It doesn't just go away on its own. I don't know that that's more Western.
Yeah, I love that you say that's universal. I also have that thought, but I don't have the data for that. So I felt I should not say that. So I appreciate that. It seems, Fred, that in order to overcome this, we need self inquiry, mindfulness, self inquiry, self investigation. Can you share your personal practice, like just a little bit? What does self inquiry mean to you? What does it look like to you? So that you yourself, when you get in a rut or you see the stories of the mind that are not serving you, what's your process?
I mean, I wouldn't use those terms because those are not my orientation. For me, also as a psychologist, not just a Buddhist or a yoga practitioner, I look at a minimum to at least try to be honest with myself.
Yeah.
So if somebody gives me feedback that's like, hey, Fred, you're not doing too good, or you're a pain in the ass, it's useful to take a moment and say, is there any truth to that? That's honesty. If I see myself reacting over and over in a certain way, there's some honesty in saying, well, obviously, this is in me. It's not just in the environment. The 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 pursuit of me trying to see myself clearly would be my way of languaging what I hear you saying. That I don't want to just be my social performance, which is what life is for most of us. We put up a persona to get along in the world, which we need. But that persona not always so accurate. Neither is the harsh voice in us. It's not always so accurate. So there's a lot of time that it takes to try to see things clearly, both outside reality and inside reality. That would be my answer to you. And that's part of what I try to get from meditation practice, is, am I at least in the right direction with reality? That would be my language. It's much more secular.
Yeah, it's very understandable, I would say. Very simple and understandable. So thank you for that.
Well, I mean, I'm not from a tradition. I'm trying actually both to help myself and help some other folks.
Yeah. Fred, when you sit with people or you speak to people who come to you and they say, I have such and such a problem and I want to meditate, and then maybe you tell them how meditation shows reality as it is. Do you have people who at first they get so excited, but then when they realize that reality is their mind that they have to see, they push it away? Does that happen in your practice, in your work?
Do that,
Sorry?
right? We all do that.
We all do that, yes.
It's a lifetime practice not to, project everything out. In our forgiveness work, we don't do long meditation practices because we're not a forgiveness group. I mean, we're not a meditation group. But I have found that you can't be honest with yourself without having some guidance in calming down. And then the calming down gives people an opportunity to see alternatives, So who are when you're pissed, and who are you when you're calm? Forgiveness comes from the who are you when you're calm. It never can come from the who are you when you're pissed. So that is a central early distinction that we make, that you want to learn that you have other voices, other ways of being that are not just your reactive emotions. That's as far as we go. But it gives people a choice and it gives people some entree into the part of themselves that's not hooked into what you might call like clinging or avoidance. Just like you have a place in you that's not caught. And the caught place of you creates grievances. The freer place in you releases them. So we try to keep it really simple.
Yeah, simple and effective. What would you say, what research now is needed more than ever? And maybe even within that, there are practices to cultivate a world that is not based on this resentment or based on anger, for people to not continue to blame or feel ashamed even for the way that they react. What work is needed now?
I mean, I don't know about the research as much, but it would be really nice if kids were legitimately taught some self-regulation practices. And from my more ecumenical secular thing, it would be like no one path. Just introduce children to the fact that they can calm down and investigate themselves a little bit. I I think we're handicapped when we grow up without that. Like that's an essential part of our mind and an essential part of our abilities. And we weaken ourselves by not teaching those. Michael Murphy, decades ago, who was the founder of Esalen, did a review of all of the research on meditation. And This was 25 years ago when it was much more primitive. But he said basically, like, this is another state besides sleeping and, dreaming and waking consciousness. And humans are poorer because they're not guided to enter that state and access it in the way they access to other states. And he mentioned that as trans-theoretical. It had nothing to do with whether you practice TM or, Zen or Christian prayer. None of that was relevant. The relevant thing was it was inside of each person waiting to be opened. And that would be what would be desperately needed is, teaching that to younger people so they have more self-awareness and control.
I agree with you. Because then what ends up happening, we grow up and we feel angry or feel so disappointed and upset. And we react, and then wonder, why is the world attacking me? But it's not. Everything is all just our mind. Everything.
Sometimes the world is attacking you, but most of the time it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. No.
Yeah. Thank you, Fred. Fred, is there anything you want people to know more than ever now?
Mhm. The major benefit of our work is forgiveness is a learnable skill. That is important. I remember reading like the Dalai Lama's Art of Happiness like decades ago. And he was emphatic that if you want to be happy, you have to practice the conditions that lead to happiness. And if you want to be unhappy, you practice the conditions that lead to unhappiness. And he listed, the more virtuous conditions. Well, we're finding out that most of those virtuous conditions can be taught.
Yes.
And you don't have to be a practicing meditator for 40 years to learn how to be more grateful or to be more hopeful or to be more forgiving or be more compassionate. You can learn some of that stuff in 6 weeks. That's from my work, that's the most important takeaway.
Thank you. Fred, where can people find you if they want to look up your work, if they want to email you? What can?
Yeah. I have my website is fredluskin.com. My books are on Amazon. There's like 100 or more videos of me on YouTube. I mean, I'm not hard to find.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today for Chung Hung Institute podcast. And I am really, really looking forward to people also gaining great benefit from your work.
Thank you. And again, I'm sorry that I was late.
Thank you.